here with Andrea Stillman at City of Peterborough Building Department, and we're going to have a conversation today around secondary suites and the permit process, what that kind of looks like. And I wondered if you could just sort of introduce yourself, because your title is permit technician.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And until today, I don't know what that means.
Okay.
So if you could help us out, that would be great.
Sure. So my role at the City of Peterborough is to accept applications that come in for all of the different types of permits, building permits that come into the city. So anything from decks and demolitions to new builds. I input the information into the system. I do a zoning review. I work with planning a lot, because a lot of our applications also deal with maybe planning applications that may have previously been approved or may need to go through a planning application to be approved before we can issue a building permit. I don't work so much with Part 3, so commercial buildings, but I have in the past. But right now my role is more residential focused, and I've been here for 4 years. Previous to that, I worked at the Township of Havelock, Belmont, Methuen in the same department.
This is apropos, because we're talking about secondary suites in residential homes.
Sure.
So that fits well. Okay. So the discussion I wanted to have really is around the permit process, because if anybody was watching previously, I had a conversation with Brad Appleby in the planning department about what it takes to, or what the city's looking at in terms of land use for secondary suites. When we come to your department, it's really the rubber hits the road. Now we're going to make this happen, right?
Yeah.
So how does someone start the process of getting permits for secondary suites?
So first of all, there was a bylaw that was passed in June of 2018, as Brad may have mentioned in his segment. And it basically tells you what are the zoning requirements that you require on your property before you can even consider having a secondary suite. So things such as, is your house a detached dwelling? Is it a row house, semi-detached? All of those types of housing permits having a secondary suite. If you have a duplex or any larger type of dwelling unit, a secondary suite is not permitted. So if you want to see that, you can definitely look at the bylaw. We do have a package that we hand out. This front page, actually, and this is what I tell most people who come in, it was actually a part of Brad's report that went to council, and it really breaks out all of the requirements from the bylaw. So if you just want to read, what do I require? We tell people just to go through this. It's more of a checklist. Do I meet this requirement? Do I meet this requirement? And as they go through, like one secondary suite per principal dwelling, the minimum floor area is 28 square meters or 301 square feet. The maximum floor area, it has to be smaller than the main unit. So it's all of these things. Once you go through this checklist and you say, yes, I meet all those requirements, then you could proceed with getting a building permit.
Excuse me. So how do I make application for a building permit?
So we do have an application form. I meant to bring one, but it's just the regular building permit application form. It is also on our website that you can access. You do need a site plan, and that is whether or not you're putting an addition on your property, or actually in the secondary suites bylaw, you are permitted to have an accessory building as a secondary suite as well. So that might be an option for some people. Those things would definitely require a site plan because you're adding a new structure on the property. But we want to check parking requirements, and that's a really big one, because there are some properties that might meet all the other requirements, but they don't have the appropriate parking requirements on their property. Typically, so other than downtown and then just outside of downtown, those require 1 or 2 parking spaces. There might be some exemptions there, so you can contact us for those. But most of the city requires 3 parking spaces that are 2.7 meters by 5.7 meters. And that's a fairly large area. You can include garages if they meet that requirement inside, but those things have to be met. And from my understanding, planning isn't so willing to do a minor variance for something like that, so parking is a really important component of that. So once we have the site plan, we would review that specifically for parking in most cases. We also recommend that you talk to a BCIN designer, so a building code identification number qualified designer. These designers have gone through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing's testing process with the Ontario Building Code. They're qualified to do drawings for houses, so that's up to 2 units. They would show, and the reason why we highly recommend a BCIN designer for these submissions is, so typically under the Ontario Building Code, a homeowner, BCIN designer, architect, or engineer could do the plans. Homeowners typically, unless they're a designer, it's just a lot of requirements that we need to see on those drawings that they might not be aware of. So a lot of times it's just easier for a designer to do that for them. Also, every house is a little different, so however you're splitting that up to have a secondary suite is going to be unique to that house. There may be similarities in a neighborhood, but from house to house, they're all kind of different. And a designer is typically a little bit more economical than an architect or engineer, but you can check that with the individuals. So yeah, once you have the plans, the site plan, the application form, you can bring it in to apply or for us to start.
So a couple of questions
Sure.
while you're talking about that. So parking is one that's come up, and I've had other realtors ask me this question. Well, what about the front yard? If there's enough space in the front yard to create another parking space, is that something that can be approved through that site plan process?
So yes, it may be an option. And again, similar to every house is different, every yard is a little bit different how you achieve that. There may be opportunity to widen the driveway altogether. There may be an opportunity to come in off the street and widen out a space once you get off the street. So that might be an option. If somebody is looking at it in the preliminary stages before they get the drawings done, if they want to bring us in a site plan to show us what they're thinking, we can review that at the counter and say, yeah, that's going to work, or no, that's not appropriate in this case. So we welcome people to come in and ask those questions ahead of time if they need to. It is a really busy counter, so it is best to come in if you can. Yeah, and if you have something to show us, then we can review that, so we can say, yeah, that's going to work, and make sure that we're on the same page when we're.
So do you have any tips on how someone can find a BCIN designer?
Typically what I tell people at the counter is Google BCIN designer Peterborough. You will get a whole list of different individuals in the area who have their qualifications. I highly recommend that you do just click on the websites to check out each individual. There is an elusive, I think it's called something like City of Peterborough BCIN designer list, and I'm not sure who compiled it, but it's not something that's been approved by the city. It's just somebody's put this together. And I have found that there's people from outside of the area that are on that list, so it is best just to check out the individual websites. What I usually recommend to people is click on a few of those, pick out maybe 2 or 3 that you think may meet your needs, give them a call, ask them about timing, process, and cost. And they might not be able to give you exact for all of those things, but if you know, yes, they'll come out to your house and take a look at what you have. They may say, I'm super swamped right now, it's going to be a couple months before I get to you. At least you know that going into the process. And then the cost, if they've done secondary suites before, they should be able to give you a ballpark figure of, it's going to cost X amount of dollars approximately. But then you can go from there and say, okay, I really like this individual, or they meet my needs for whatever reason.
So anecdotally, have you heard a range of costs?
I haven't heard, we don't hear a lot about what people pay for their plans. I mean, it's a pretty in-depth procedure what they're doing.
Certainly.
Like it's duplexing. And I should just make mention on this, and I don't know if you were planning to get to this after. If you have a finished basement, sometimes that's almost more cost in the end than if you had an unfinished basement. Because a lot of times with a finished basement, they've put up the ceiling, whether it's the tiles or the drywall, maybe just half-inch drywall because it was just a house and they had a rec room down there or whatever. But now you need to meet the sound transmission class, so that's an STC rating of 50, plus you have fire resistance rating. So you're going to likely have to pull all that ceiling down and replace it. So and that's why it's a great idea to have a designer come and say, in your individual situation, because sometimes things may have been done with permit, without permit, whatever. So maybe part of the work is already done, and if they can just confirm that it's been done, they can say, yeah, you know what, this is already there, and we can give this option for the STC rating and the fire resistance rating, and you're halfway done. It might be in other cases, if you want to go through with this, that whole ceiling needs to come down, maybe
Right.
some walls. So just be aware of that. So it is, we want to keep people safe and protected and separate the units out safely.
So that was going to be one of my questions.
Sure.
If somebody's already, they're looking at buying a house that's already got an illegal unit in it,
Yes.
and they want to do the right thing and make it safe.
Right.
So they come in and visit you or one of your colleagues
Sure.
and say, this is what I've got. I want to make sure I'm doing it correctly.
Yeah.
And, would you send an inspector to the house to take a look at it as it sits before making permit application?
So a couple things could have happened. We might have already been there. There might have been either a bylaw individual or an inspector, a building inspector has been there and may have already done sort of a preliminary assessment. If it's something that we didn't know about, and we have this all the time, what I would recommend is that they have their designer come in.
Okay.
Because we typically, it's not typically our role to do an inspection unless there's a complaint or there's a building permit on the property. So in that case, I would have the designer come, take a look at what's already there. Typically, a designer can give you options. If it's an older home, so for sort of a jargony thing, in the building code, we deal with Part 9 of the building code typically for residential. Once you have an older home, you may have some exceptions from Part 9 in Part 11. So let's say ceiling height, for instance. You may be able to get a lower ceiling height because you have an older home. But
Okay.
that's where your designer would come in and say, okay, this is what Part 9 says, but I know in Part 11 it allows for this, so we can use that area to be able to do what you need to do in this space. So that's where a designer is really helpful, to give you those options. They may give you a couple options and say, this is maybe the most costly, or this is, but at least you have options. And in some cases, there might not be any options. And they may say to you, this is, this didn't work out so well, or, maybe you'd have to put in a new set of stairs or something like that. But at least they can advise you of that early on in the process.
Okay.
That's a great tip.
Really basic. What's it cost for the permit process?
So we base it on construction value. So a lot of our permits are based on estimated construction value. What we have, so it is $20 today. It is $20.65 per $1,000 of construction value. Minimum permit fee is $207, so that's about $10,000 of construction value. What we've seen typically for secondary suites is anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 for estimated construction value. So it's not a lot that we question somebody's construction value. We're not necessarily looking for receipts. If we think it's a bit low, we may ask for a breakdown in how the individual came up with that amount, because there are quite a few inspections required. And one of the things that we do provide once you do get your building permit issued to you is that your inspector, which is typically Jordan Stockdale, who is our Part 9, one of our Part 9 building inspectors, you can call him to come out to do a courtesy inspection. So if you have a finished space already, for instance, and now that you have your plans, he could explain a little bit about what the notes mean in your plans, because every set of plans that go back out that are approved, they have notes in them from the reviewer. So just things to keep in mind as you're doing the construction. But he'll also come out and take a look and be able to give you some tips for, things that other people have had issues with, or he can tell you when he needs to come back to take a look at the work that you've done. Sometimes people have questions. It's best to have your contractor there as well, if you could. They have questions about making that continuous insulation between the two units to make sure there's no break, so that the fire separation is maintained between the two units, and things like that, the contractor may not understand fully how he needs to do that. So Jordan can give some feedback and supply this service in order to make the process go smoothly.
We talked about a little bit kind of the prep work in advance. How long does it take? So, homeowners, they've had a designer come to the house, give them an idea of what might need to be done. Then they come in and speak to you about getting permits. How long is the process? Is it kind of an on-the-spot thing? Or? So
no, with most, I should say, permit applications, there are review times that are allotted under the Ontario Building Code. we are permitted to take up to 15 business days to review a secondary suite application. We try to keep our timelines down as much as possible. If everything is included in that package that's supposed to be, we should have that turned around in quite a bit less time than that. Usually what we try to do within the first couple days, we'll do a preliminary review of everything that was handed in. Mm-hmm. We can let you know within 2 to 3 days that, we're missing this, or we need clarification on a few things, or maybe you're putting in a beam and you forgot you needed an engineer or something like that. So we can provide that feedback fairly quickly. It all depends how long it takes for it to come back in. Once it's, again, a complete application, then it goes back in the queue again. So that will delay you if not everything is included. Again, another good reason to use a designer, because typically they know exactly what we're going to need to see. So a lot of times with the secondary suites, they have been pretty much a complete application. We can have them turned around within the 15-day. Even right now when it's insanely busy, we can typically have those turned around within the 15-day
so 15 business days. So we're talking about 3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah.
So 3 to 4 weeks if there were some revisions, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Or does the 15 days reset when it gets resubmitted?
Not necessarily. Usually it just goes back in the line. We try to get to it, especially if it was just some minor things. We try to get right back to it. The goal is to try to keep things moving along as fast as possible. We try not to sit on things very long, because the longer we hold it, the more chance, we could misplace things. And so we don't want to do that either. We want to make sure things are moving smoothly.
And I'm sure that's a frustration of homeowners too. They want to do things the right way. Sure. They try the process and it takes, in their minds, for a very, very long time. So they get frustrated.
Sure.
It's good to hear that you're trying to move things along.
Yeah. And before you hand an application in, if you want us to check it at the counter and make sure everything is there, because it's best if you can hand in a complete application. If you know something is missing, it's best just to hold on to the whole package until you have everything, because then it doesn't delay anybody. We keep it moving through the system. There's no stop, start, and getting back in the queue. So if you know, for instance, if you're putting in a new furnace as part of this renovation, wait until you have your HVAC information before you hand in all your stuff, because we're just going to be asking you for it and we can't complete the review until we have it. So it's easier for us. Right. It's easier for the homeowner.
My next question, excuse me, I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Sure.
I'll ask and then I'm going to say what I think it is.
Okay, sure.
What do you see as the biggest challenge to getting these secondary suites in place? And it sounds to me like it's making sure that all the information is there when the application is made in the first place.
I would say that's probably our struggle with every type of application, making sure everything is in the application. I think probably part of the other, and maybe it's getting better now, but early on, I think there was the thinking that now the bylaw is passed, it's going to be, there's no issue to having a second unit. And there isn't from a bylaw perspective. So previously, you would have to do a zone amendment first, then you come to the building department, apply for your building permit. Fortunately or unfortunately, the Ontario Building Code has certain requirements that we have to meet. Now, given that, they've also relaxed some requirements between a single unit and what was formerly a duplex, because they changed the definition in the Ontario Building Code to say a house is actually 2 dwelling units. But so they allow for some leniencies with things, but we still require the fire separations, the egress, the exiting, sound transmission. A lot of the life safety things are still important. So yes, it's relaxed from a zoning perspective, but the building code still kicks in the end, and those requirements still need to be met. So.
What do you think is, when somebody's making an application or they've talked to the designer, what is the most often surprising thing that homeowners run into? The ones I've heard anecdotally are, they've got their designs done, they've made application, then they find out after the fact that, your windows aren't large enough for the amount of light coming in.
Sure.
Let alone egress.
Yeah, so there are requirements for natural light from the outside, for kitchens and bedrooms. There's like rec rooms don't require it. There are certain rooms in the basement that don't require it, but there are, and especially if it's an older home. A lot of older homes had smaller windows. Maybe they had the old sliders on them, so maybe they don't meet today's egress requirements, for instance. So yes, adding windows, and sometimes adding windows to a basement can be quite a chore because in some cases you need engineering for that. It depends on the type of foundation that you have. You may also need to put in a window well and make sure the window well meets the requirements for people, if it's an egress window specifically, for them to get out safely. So yeah, that is something you may want to check. Windows are a big thing. I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's not all the time that we see walkouts being changed into a secondary suite. And those are nice because you have an immediate way to get out. It's a dedicated egress. What we see a lot of times in Peterborough is that there's the side entrance. You go up a few steps to get to the main floor. You go down the stairs to the basement. So figuring out exactly how you're going to handle that entering and exiting for those two units. Are you going to block off that upstairs from that side and then they have a dedicated egress? That's usually what we see, but it doesn't come without challenges because then you need the fire separations from that main unit in the hallway. So yeah, that's the good thing about a designer walking through with you. Maybe even if they could walk through with you before you purchase, that would be super helpful. That doesn't always work with their schedules.
Or ours.
Or
in
yours.
This marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, things are moving so quickly. Yeah. And I talk to people all the time and they're like, yeah, I'm really interested in this house, but I'm not sure. And, you know, we don't get eyes on them. And so you explain it as much as possible what they need to be looking for. Ideally, if there is a chance for a designer to go through, that's the best, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Right on.
And not often. I understand that.
Brad mentioned in our conversation something about, and the number seems small to me, about 18 applications last year or something like that. I'm just wondering how many.
I should check this. I would say in the last 2 weeks, we have got 6 new applications.
6 in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
So, yeah, last year we had, I would say the complete applications were a little slow coming in because people weren't sure what we needed. He might be right about the 18 applications, and I should have checked the statistic. But I would say, I mean, daily, I'm talking to people at the counter about secondary suites. And then that usually works into an application being submitted at some point, but it's every day at the counter we're talking about.
I'm glad that people are taking it seriously and doing it the right way. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, and most people who I talk to, and you know, there's always going to be those other people, but most people I talk to, that's the reason they're there. They want to do it the right way. They want to find out the information, and it's always best to come, no matter what kind of permit you think you need or you don't need, it's always best to come and just ask us, and we're happy to share information with you or try to answer as best we can if you're looking for setback information, whether or not you can put an addition on or whatever. Just come and ask us and we're happy to share that information.
Right on. Okay. 2 more quick questions.
Sure.
What can realtors do, because I'm here from Century 21, what can we do to help in that process as the bridge between homeowners and the city?
So,
or is there anything?
I mean, we have to be careful how much information that we give out, so that we have to be cognizant of freedom of information. However, if you're wondering about parking requirements or zoning or, you know, basic secondary suite information, I'm happy to give out this package. I mean, it's nothing special, but it's a package and we can discuss it. We can talk about a property from a zoning perspective and what's required in general terms. I can't tell you the history of permits or whatever on the property, but you're welcome to come in to the office and ask us those questions. We also have April Hope at the counter this summer, as well as Rita O'Grady, me, and Susan Morrison. So one of us or all of us can participate in helping to get the zoning information out if you're not sure about a property, or if you have technical questions. You know, if you're wondering about a size of a window or what have you, just come in and ask us the questions. We're happy to do that.
And last question I have for you, I think, is what questions should I have asked that I didn't?
Oh, goodness. I think we've covered a lot of it. Like, yeah, it's similar to a lot of other building permit processes. It is a bit more involved than the average homeowner has probably been through because it is duplexing their house. But we are trying to focus on customer service as much as possible, trying to help people understand the process, and we want to make it seamless for everybody and the least amount of pain that we can for everybody. So if we can help the realtors before somebody purchases a property, come in and ask us the questions, and we'll try to clarify as much as possible.
Excellent.
All right.
Really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
So anybody that's watching this, if you've got further questions, obviously you can reach out to me, call City Hall and ask for Andrea. I'm sure she's happy to answer your questions. But thanks for watching, and have a great day.